Hi. I recently did a few videos discussing the Israel-Gaza war and the Middle East from a philosophical perspective, and so it only makes sense that I would also offer a philosophical comment on the current campus protests here in the United States, since they are ostensibly about the same thing. I also happen to live right here in New York City, where this whole nonsense began. So, most obviously, the students who are engaging in these pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas, but I repeat myself, protests are extremely ignorant. The fact that it started at an Ivy League school, Columbia, means absolutely nothing in that context. Education here in the United States and also in the Western world as a whole, including higher education, has been so consistently degraded over the last several decades, but especially since the 1990s, that one can safely say that the students in question know nothing of the world. They are also, for the most part, anti-Semitic and Oikophobia, that is, anti-American and anti-Western. But this is so obvious as not to require any further comment, and many other people, of course, have already talked about this at length. I want rather to focus on some more philosophical aspects. And the first thing I'd say in that regard is that the students are suffering from what I would call historical envy. What that means is that these people desire to live at a special historic moment, and they are envious of those who actually did. They therefore attempt to create such a moment themselves, no matter how destructive it may be, so as then to be able to live it. This is sometimes referred to as Selma envy in an American context, but it is in fact an international and thoroughly human phenomenon. As I wrote in my Western Self-Contempt, most disasters inflicted upon humanity were the brainchildren of those who believed themselves to live in magnificent historic times, who displayed their farcical altruism as ostentatiously as possible. When the young scream about revolution against something, anything, they are all unified by their vain desire to straddle history and reach the climax of human endeavor. Related to this is the idea that universities, as intellectuals in general, consider themselves to be at the vanguard of human knowledge and progress. Intellectualism thus breeds disrespect for established ways of thinking. Now, this can, of course, sometimes be a good thing, but it also leads to degrees of outlandishness that are less common in other segments of society. Already Thucydides, in his History of the Peloponnesian War, has the Spartan king Archidamus II say, "We are wise because we are not so educated as to look down on the laws." Similarly, he has Cleon of Athens argue that intelligent people want to appear wiser than the laws, and thereby often end up overthrowing their cities. So the vanity of the urban intellectual, or supposed intellectual, leads him to feel a sense of responsibility for educating the public and for transmitting supposedly enlightened ideas to his society at large, and this makes the intellectual more subversive. Once again, illustrating the universality of these observations is the fact that not only Thucydides comments upon it, but in a very different time and different culture, also Thomas Hobbes, who writes, "Nature itself cannot err, and as men abound in copiousness of language, so they become more wise or more mad than ordinary. Nor is it possible, without letters, for any man to become either excellently wise or excellently foolish." This phenomenon, coupled with historical envy, results in the ridiculous anti-American and anti-Semitic behavior we currently find at American universities. It is not a coincidence that such a thing started at one of our foremost institutions, Columbia, and then spread to lower-tier schools from there. The vanity and outlandishness that supposed intellectuals have means that the higher up in the intellectual pecking order a university is, the more eagerly it will embrace all the progressive absurdities. My own alma mater, in fact, the University of Heidelberg, is actually my favorite example of this by dint of its extremeness. Now, I happen to love my alma mater, and I'm very happy that I got to study and to teach there. But in the 1930s, she was the most sycophantically Nazi German university and one of the first to dismiss all of her Jewish professors. And only 3 decades later, in the 1960s, she was the most extreme hotbed of communist sympathy. Now, the point is that these two periods are not opposites, but an expression of the same thing, namely, among other things, intellectual outlandishness and historical envy. These factors come together in one final observation, which expresses itself in the oikophobia and anti-Semitism that we see growing all around us. These students are striving to live up to what they perceive to be virtuous, just behavior. Now, the virtuous ideal in earlier civilizational phases is something that actually exists within the social paradigm of a society. And so when a person strives to be virtuous in a society's earlier days, this is often fruitful because that striving is toward a goal that actually exists within and is embraced by that society on the whole. That is to say, the virtuous person strives to be what his own society, what his own social paradigm considers to be virtuous. But in the declining and decadent phase of a society in which we're currently living, virtuous striving is directed toward an ideal that does not actually exist within the paradigm of that society. Rather, the virtuous ideal is something that had previously not existed at all, such as Nazism, or it is something that had previously existed, but that lies outside of the social paradigm, such as communism, or as now, Islam, however poorly understood. And so a lot of virtuous striving now is toward an ideal that is not possible within our social paradigm, which is to say that it is not really virtuous at all. That is, virtuous striving now is something that seeks to turn our social paradigm on its head. Given the impossibility of achieving such an ideal within the society, the purpose of such striving becomes mainly the display of the supposedly virtuous person himself, as opposed to the attempt at actual possible virtue, even if it is often perceived as such, of course. Incidentally, I have a brief video on this channel, an interview excerpt in which I also run through this point. And so displays of virtue in our increasingly decadent and anti-Semitic times become purely solipsistic. This is leading to a loss of future for our social paradigm, unless, of course, we can muster enough confidence to believe in that paradigm again and to insist that young students learn it. So let us insist on our tradition, and let us understand that toward the students in question, we should have nothing but contempt and condescension. Such people have rejected all tradition and are thus empty shells without meaning in life, and they therefore only have as much power and passion as are given to them. And so if university administrators and public authorities showed a strong, united front, not only would the protests wither away overnight, but most protesters themselves would soon forget about their contemptible cause and their unrighteous anger. And finally, but on a much happier note, to anyone watching this who happens to be a mother, including my own mother, Happy Mother's Day.